ONDC, or Open Network for Digital Commerce, has been in the news a fair bit recently.
India's ONDC platform is said to be a game changer in the e-commerce space.
ONDC's entry caused a disruption in the food delivery space.
पिछले कुछ दिनों से मैं ONDC के बारे में लगातार सुन रहा हूँ.
ONDC is the latest buzzword that everybody is excited about.
ONDC is being promoted as India's biggest digital initiative after UPI, or Unified Payments Interface, which, as we all know, has revolutionized digital payments in the country. Now, simply put, ONDC is a network that aims to connect all the buyers with all the sellers in the e-com space. So right now, when you want to buy something online, you go to one e-commerce app and compare products and rates. If you're really savvy and really driven to find the best possible rates, you'd perhaps go to a second platform, but that's it. This gives you access to hundreds of sellers, but also keeps you away from millions others who are selling online. Likewise, the seller on a platform you haven't accessed doesn't get the opportunity to sell you his products. ONDC seeks to eliminate that by building the most comprehensive possible network of online buyers and sellers. It also aims to enable online e-commerce in India's remote towns and villages by making this space a lot easier to set shop in and buy from. It's been in the works for more than 2 years, and the network now covers 236 cities in the country and has onboarded 36,000 merchants. Over the last few weeks, ONDC's discounts on food delivery has made it the subject of quite a bit of internet chatter. Here's my colleague Mugdha Waria, who's closely tracked this.
ONDC had a soft launch about a year ago. In fact, exactly a year ago, around May. And at that time, everyone was calling it the Amazon Flipkart Slayer. But now, as food delivery has picked up on the platform, it is suddenly being seen as a challenger to Swiggy and Zomato. And if their mobility vertical, which also they've launched recently, if that picks up, they soon may be seen as a competitor to Ola and Uber. So yeah, of late, it has definitely become a big deal. And that is because of a lot of chatter on social media about how the prices of several food items from several big restaurants are different on ONDC compared to on Swiggy and Zomato. They are much, much lower. In fact, some people have gone on to say that they have seen a 50 to 60% discount. So yes, right now it's definitely become a buzzword because it is being seen as a big challenger to Swiggy and Zomato.
But as the network grows in size and scope, several questions crop up. Will people discard the comforts of Zomato, Swiggy, Ola, and Uber and come to this mega platform? Or will it just be too much clutter for them? Why is this platform that's a government initiative playing a discount war? Who's funding these discounts? Are they sustainable? Is ONDC really a disruptor in the game, and is it here to stay? All this and more in today's episode. It's the 19th of May. I'm your host Anirban Chaudhary. This is the Morning Brief. To be candid, before this episode, I had very little idea of what ONDC is all about as far as actual usability or user experience is concerned. So, we decided to ask some of you to see whether it's actually caught the national fancy yet.
Isn't this something for small retailers?
Am I aware of ONDC? Yes.
No clue at all. Never heard about it.
I think it's just like Swiggy or Zomato from which you can order food and groceries.
Of course, we'll shift to ONDC because it has a huge price difference compared to Zomato and Swiggy.
I don't know much about ONDC. I just know that it's somewhere related to Paytm, I guess.
I have watched a few reels on Instagram and know it offers good discounts, but I haven't tried it.
I haven't used it, but I order in a lot of food and I'd love to know how it works.
So Mugdha, I think this is a good time to tell our listener, how does one use ONDC?
Absolutely. First and foremost, ONDC is not a separate app. It's not a separate platform. It's essentially a network. It's essentially an established protocol is what they say. Basically, what they are doing is they're connecting different apps in the overall e-commerce ecosystem. They're unbundling the e-commerce ecosystem. Now, for example, currently when you order on Amazon or Flipkart, the products that you see are from the sellers who have been onboarded by the platforms themselves. And even the logistics is often fulfilled by Amazon or Flipkart. But what ONDC is trying to do is it is trying to unbundle these different services. So there are going to be different buyer-side apps, which are the different consumer-facing apps, where a customer can go and search for a product or a service. And these apps currently are Paytm. PhonePe has launched its PIN code app. Magic Pin also has a buyer-side app. In fact, there are quite a few buyer-side apps already. Then on the other end are the seller-side apps. These are the apps which are going to onboard the merchants. And these seller apps are going to receive the request from the buyer app, and they're going to fulfill the order through different logistic partners. So even a logistic partner can be a completely separate entity in this whole ONDC network. So that's how ONDC will essentially work.
Okay. So for example, I have Paytm on my phone open right now. What do I do?
So on Paytm, in fact, if you scroll down, you will see an option for food delivery, and that is essentially ONDC. There are also options for grocery items, and that is also
right.
Do you see it?
Right. I do.
Absolutely. So that is ONDC. Once you enter that, you entered the ONDC network.
Have you used the platform and availed of those discounts?
I did, and I definitely did see that the prices were definitely lower. In fact, just the prices that the restaurants were listing, the menu price or the listing price itself was lower for many restaurants than what they were listing on Zomato and Swiggy. Then you add to that the discount that ONDC was giving. They have a 50 rupees discount on an order, a straight off discount. And then even the delivery charges were taken off. There was free delivery for many orders. But of course, that is now changing. But yes, I did definitely try it. Experience-wise, the user experience can be much better, given that we are now so used to seeing the smooth experience on Swiggy and Zomato. But the delivery did come in time. It did come in about 30-40 minutes. So overall, not a bad experience.
So obviously the team behind the network is fairly ambitious about its growth prospects and scope, right, Mugdha?
Absolutely, Anirban. The ONDC team, they have big, ambitious plans for the network across categories, not just food delivery, even in grocery, in e-commerce, in travel, mobility, etc. To know more about this, I spoke to ONDC CEO, Mr. T. Koshi himself.
Great. Let's play that conversation.
So, Mr. Koshi, thank you so much for joining us. And actually, if you can just start by telling us currently what the scale is at ONDC and what is the category mix across food and beverage, across grocery, across other categories.
As you're aware that in the last year, about May, we started with one buyer application, 5 seller application, 1 logistics provider, with some merchants in 5 cities as alpha test. So this was actually to get the idea of more and more merchants and seller application getting comfortable with the idea of being a part of the open network. So it proceeded like that. And today we have about 236 cities with some merchants that is there. In October, we said that now we need to make it available to a broader cross-section of buyers. And in end of September, beginning of October, we started our beta testing where we published that anybody can come and buy in Bangalore, and then we added Meerut. And by the time we have had more network participants joining as a buyer side and seller side, then when these kind of things happen, we sort of started refining. And if in the meantime, in April, we started adding other domains like fashion, beauty and personal care, home decor, home appliances, electronics. And we also started mobility in the same time in February. That sort of erupted. And today that does something like 35,000 transactions a day in 2 cities, Bangalore and Cochin, which we think that this is going to get a acceptance. Many companies who will say a way of supporting in a network like ONDC.
Did you think that a year down the line, ONDC would be seen as this disruptor and a challenger to players like Swiggy and Zomato, which we have seen over the past few weeks
The idea of ONDC was to bring in democratization onto digital commerce, giving big and small enterprises equal opportunity, and without any central platform having a stranglehold on the sellers and their schemes and their data and their advertisement and so on and so forth. So when that idea got floated, immediately some people thought it is a competition against, let's say, Amazon's or Swiggy or Uber or Ola. There is no special deal for a large and a small. If you're a small seller coming through a very small seller platform, making your catalog visible, you will have the equal visibility from every buyer applications. So that is how it is seen as a disruptor of the way e-commerce is undertaken, not as going and killing or destroying the value already created by anybody.
Can you just tell us about what is the whole strategy around incentives and discounts that ONDC is offering? And how long will you be able to sustain this? Because even recently, Jeffries put out a report which suggested that these incentives may not be sustainable in the long term.
First and foremost, it's okay. For example, just like we have different operational expenditure, stimulating and jump-starting the network is another operational expenditure or another operational investment that we have to make sure that some threshold volumes happen. So what we did is, one of the intervention that we did was work with the network participants and said up to certain number of transactions a day or something, there'll be, and for each network participants, we will provide very limited support per transaction. We found actually a couple of buyer application came and said they are also going to use some kind of financial incentive to encourage people to do trial. We found some sellers coming and say that I'm going to give, because they believe that it is going to become a more equitable marketplace. I mean, our intention is not to create some closed loop of customers or sellers in captivity, if I almost want to use that word in a lighter vein. But the idea is to get more and more people participate. When that happens, it will encourage specialization and innovation at every building block. And because of the very strong competition that is there, rent-seeking capacity of any centralized platform will not be there. So if I'm a seller in one seller platform, and if the seller platform is asking for unfair charges, without any lock-in, I can seamlessly move from that platform to another. So you would see a lot more efficiency, a lot more fair treatment by the platforms on one side. And, one way I will say what Jeffrey said is correct with respect to that this is not the way to be sustained. But the way they looked at the costing and the way they looked at how the network has its own efficiencies and its own economies of scale as a network itself, they've really got some of the assumptions wrong.
One point that the Jeffries report raises is that there was a question about if players on ONDC are charging lower commissions, then why are Swiggy and Zomato charging high commissions? And what Jeffries has pointed out is that despite the bigger commissions, they're not able to make money given all the expenses.
First and foremost, strategy of any of these platforms was to have a complete stranglehold on the total value chain. Okay, and also, so they had two things. One, they have to have the acquisition of their buyers and make sure that they get a very strong loyalty so that they end up become a monopoly buyer with significant control on the sellers. Second is that they try to do everything by themselves without specialization and innovation. One of the reasons why many of these people are not really able to do is because they're trying to do everything by themselves at very high cost. This unbundling and interoperability will bring innovations and specialization on building blocks of commerce that on an aggregate will reduce the total cost of operation on the value chain.
Okay. But Mr. Koshi, then will you be continuing with this program of incentives and discounts?
Even today, you're not going for every transaction. It's only some up to certain number of transactions, and we are going to tweak it across the next few months to make sure that it is triggering transaction on certain segments and so on and so forth. The idea is to jumpstart the network, help the network participants to reach certain threshold and get more and more sellers to come. In the meantime, we are also creating an ONDC academy to make sure that there's a lot of people who are trained in the various process and operations, building up and being available for various network participants in the coming months.
Okay. And, you talked about ONDC Academy and all the initiatives you're doing to build a knowledge base for your ecosystem partners. Now, one complaint on social media or generally among consumers is there's not been enough consumer awareness of how to access ONDC, which apps are available for customers to access ONDC, etc. So would you be spending money on also creating customer awareness, or are you going to leave it to the players like Paytm and PhonePe to build the customer awareness?
See, there are multiple initiatives that's happening. Of course, the first port of call is the buyer application. If you look at the PhonePes and Paytms of the world, they already have millions of consumers who come to their platforms for some purposes every day. And they are the people who are digitally familiar. And we have a very active social media campaign that is happening, that has started in the last month through multiple social media channels. And we have also worked with many of the, the people who do such, educational and knowledge building exercise to make it available. Many of the sellers have started with social media, but they are also going to come out with their own outreach strategies in the coming months as this get more and more prevalent. So it is going to be community coming together, not any particular entity trying to capture a user base.
Mr. Koshi, what are the challenges that you're seeing on the ground, especially as you're seeing the scale pick up? There have been issues about dispute resolution. There have been also issues, especially on the grocery front, on the kind of catalog management with the smaller kirana players.
See, a couple of things. One is that, as I've explained to you, the extent of seller-side participation in e-commerce today is limited, which we are trying to expand in the coming days. And even as now, we have about 35 to 40,000 merchants already there on non-mobility side, and another 60,000 drivers on network. They are all the people who have not been familiar with the requests and requirements of an digital network. So we need to continuously help them to resolve those things and help them to establish good processes. So what we are doing is, there again, we are getting support from, like I said, enterprises like SIDBI and NABARD and MSME, etc., who are sort of creating schemes and incentives to strengthen this class of enterprises to leverage the digital commerce network. In the extreme case of some dispute between that, our country has already implemented what we call an online dispute resolution mechanism, which is also being integrated. As of now, the total flow is semi-automatic. In the coming maybe a month's time, the whole thing is going to be a fully automatic system, including a dispute. If it becomes a dispute, the buyer or seller, whoever is the agreed party, ability to submit to an online dispute resolution mechanism. And beyond that, we have the legal framework in our country anyway. So this is how the network will mature and grow in the coming days.
So picking up on one of your key questions to Mr. Koshi Mugdha about the discounts, I'm curious to know, who are the guys backing ONDC? I mean, clearly the government may be sort of evangelizing it and promoting it a lot, but it's not really a stakeholder, right? So who are the guys backing it, and why would they fund these discounts?
So while ONDC is an initiative by the DPIIT, it's registered as a Section 8 company. It's a non-profit company, but it has raised quite a lot of funding from top public and private institutions. In fact, to be precise, it has raised about 180 crore rupees in equity from several leading institutions like the Bombay Stock Exchange, NSE, banks like Kotak Mahindra Bank, Axis Bank, HDFC Bank, SIDBI, State Bank of India, you name it. There are all these big public institutions and private institutions that are backing ONDC. So they definitely have a lot of funds to dip into and to use that to promote ONDC, to offer discounts, to attract customers and merchants.
Okay, let's now talk about the various players in the value chain, right? And how do they make money?
Right. So Anirban, I already told you about the fact that there are going to be buyer side apps like the Paytms and the pin code by PhonePe. Then there are going to be the seller side apps like Magic Pin, Seller App, Bitsilla, etc. And then there are going to be, of course, the logistic partners as well. Now, all these players are going to charge their commissions, just like what Swiggy and Zomato also charge. Remember that in Swiggy and Zomato, all these services are bundled together, right? Because the customers are acquired by Swiggy, the restaurants are listed on Swiggy, and even the logistics are fulfilled by Swiggy and Zomato. But here, of course, this is going to be more distributed, but each player is going to charge a commission. But one important thing to note is that right now the commissions are pretty low. In fact, the overall commission that a restaurant will have to pay on ONDC right now is under 10%. Whereas on Swiggy and Zomato, restaurants are paying anywhere between 18 to 24 or 25% as just as commissions.
Oh, wow. That's a fairly large gap. Are these commissions even sustainable?
Now, that's a very interesting point, Anirban. And if you have read recent analyst reports, Jeffries has put out one, JM Financial has put out one, and they all seem to suggest that these commissions and these lower rates on the ONDC network are not going to be sustainable. I myself spoke to some of these seller apps and buyer apps who currently are charging a lower commission. But the fact is that they say they are absorbing a lot of the costs. There are a lot of costs involved in onboarding merchants, in training them, in integrating their inventory, catalog management, etc. But the commissions they're charging right now are pretty low. So eventually they will have to raise those commissions, is what I myself understand from some of these seller apps itself. And even analysts seem to suggest that these commissions are not going to be sustainable. Remember, even Zomato and Swiggy started off with lower commissions. But gradually, over the years, they have raised their commissions. In fact, just a few months ago, ET had reported that Zomato was already talking to restaurants about raising commissions even more. And the thing is, we have to also see that despite the commissions being so high for Zomato and Swiggy, they have only very recently started seeing profitability in their food delivery business because the costs involved are a lot. Of course, we have to wait and watch whether the scale that ONDC can reach to, if that will bring in efficiencies and if that will help keep the commissions and the costs down. But as of now, a lot of experts suggest that these commissions may not be sustainable.
One of the prominent seller apps on this network is Magic Pin, and Mugdha had a lot of questions for its CEO, Anshu Sharma. Let's toss over to that interview.
Anshu, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
If you can just talk to us about the kind of scale that you have seen on ONDC, especially in recent weeks. We have seen that it has reached quite a peak. So how many orders are you doing every day?
Yeah, so let me take you through that journey. It took time to get the integrations going, but sometime in the month of April, it took up steam. So end of March, I remember we were doing 100 transactions a day on the network. By the middle of April, we were doing 1,000 transactions a day. By the end of April, we were doing 10,000 transactions a day. And that's when I remember the news hit for the first time. The week after that, we were doing 20,000 transactions in a day. So the trajectory has been exponential. And it looks like it's happened overnight. But I'd say that, all of these things, they take time and a lot of prior work for that trajectory to start to happen. But now that trajectory is in, I see that the network is just adding more supply, more demand, and as a result, it should continue to scale from here onwards.
But Anshu, was this largely driven by discounts on ONDC? We have seen a lot of people comparing prices on ONDC with what they see on Swiggy and Zomato, and it is considerably lower. And of course, that's because of the discounts that ONDC is offering. There were also free deliveries on many orders. So what is the kind of role that has played? And now that there are certain caps on these incentives and which could even be phased out in the future, will the scale be sustained?
Yeah, I think, Mukta, it's a more nuanced piece. See, what happens is that when we hit 10,000 orders, at that point, the media narrative just became very quickly about, hey, ONDC is going to change the world overnight, and this is the best possible thing, great prices, right? That is the only thing that was being talked about for the next week or so. By the time we got to 20,000, narrative flipped to a little bit of what you're saying now, which is saying that it was because of discounts, it's not going to be sustainable, it might die out, right? I think both of these are extreme positions. The reality is that in most categories, you'd find large players who over the years have built very strong positions and services, both to demand as well as to supply. So while there was this conversation around that ONDC is doing incentives, that's actually not true. The entire network of all of these very capable companies all around on the network want this network to exist because the end state on this is far more efficient. And in a way, they're all trying to figure out how do we make sure that the networks get scaled out. And it will take investment. There's no doubt it'll take investment, like most of the other large platforms have. But what is going to be true is that it's going to take much less investment, it'll happen much faster. It'll be far more efficient because there's no one who's incurring new fixed cost. For us, adding more demand because of ONDC is a no-brainer. We would love to do that. We were anyway doing it. For Paytm to be able to add more supply without having to build the network is a no-brainer. So a lot of these synergies, they're not getting accounted for in that narrow, I'd say, narrative of that it's discount funded. It is not. It will need investment to get attention, but as it scales, it'll keep becoming more and more efficient.
No, absolutely. The discounts, of course, are not being entirely funded by ONDC. The restaurants themselves are also passing on certain discounts. And of course, that is because the cost of doing business for them has also come down. And that is because of the lower commissions that different players are charging on ONDC. I wanted to ask you about your commissions. Are you charging different commissions on ONDC compared to what you're charging outside ONDC, or is it at the same level?
Yes. It is at the same level. And in some cases, some participants are to that extent excited about saying, how can I support? So can I do something more for the network?
So, Anshu, if you saw a report by JM Financial, they seem to suggest that Magic Pin charges anywhere up to 22% of commissions for discovery plus delivery, etc. Are these costs and are these commissions then being passed on to the restaurants by Magic Pin even on ONDC?
We just charge a complete take rate to them, which is all inclusive. And it might vary. It might vary anywhere from, let's say, 15%, in some cases going up to 22% as well. Now, this is the base. Some merchants might run additional offers on top of it. And as a result of that, they would be contributing more. And it might be 1+1. You order one burger, then you get one more burger free, right? Something of that kind, which is an in-kind offer from the merchant, but it can be quantified by the consumer. So, as I said to you previously, our take rates from our merchant partners are the same, whether the transaction is on ONDC or it is not on ONDC.
Anshu, also on this topic, I wanted to ask you about this clause that Swiggy and Zomato seem to have with several restaurants, and that is the price parity clause, where they ask restaurants to match the prices on any other platform or any other channel with what they have on Swiggy or Zomato. Now, given the difference that we are seeing on ONDC apps versus Swiggy and Zomato, are restaurants being asked by these two players to ensure that they match the prices with their platforms? Any indication that you have on this? Because I personally have seen that some of the restaurants have increased the prices of their items from what it was a couple of weeks ago, and they've now brought it on par with what it is on Zomato and Swiggy.
It's a very large and fragmented market at both ends. It's really hard to price control at a merchant level. And given the number of stakeholders and the dynamic pricing all around, from logistics to the seller, let's say the buyer incentive, the seller commission, and the ONDC incentive, right? No one can actually say this product at this price on this app is going to be, and you would find that differentiation across, even within ONDC, whether it is a pin code app selling, or let's say on Magic Pin as a buyer app selling, or Paytm as a buyer app selling, you might find the prices to be different. So it would vary on a bunch of things. The end question you asked me, that are we seeing that the merchants are coming back and renegotiating on prices? No, we are not seeing that. In fact, the reverse. We are seeing a very strong sentiment, which is to say, I've heard of ONDC. What can I do about it? Existing partners, new partners.
And interestingly, Anshu, Zomato is an investor in Magic Pin. So how are those synergies working out for you, especially because ONDC is being seen as this competitor to Zomato?
Magic Pin's relationship with Zomato goes way back than ONDC. The reason that investment happened was, and in fact, Dipendra joined the board prior to the investment happening, largely because of the way we saw the world, to say that local retail is massive and Zomato is doing food within that category. We are doing fashion, as I said, pharmacies, large QSR stores, electronics, beauty. So those synergies continue, those exchanges continue.
So no hard questions from Zomato then?
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Yeah. If anything, I would say if someone's going to do it, might as well redo it. Yeah.
So Anshu, are there any costs that Magic Pin is currently absorbing on ONDC as a buyer app or as a seller app, which you are currently not passing on to the merchants yet? but which could eventually be passed on and which could eventually then increase the costs for the restaurants as well. If you can just clarify that for us.
We don't charge the merchant for logistics separately. Logistics has to be baked within the overall take rate that we have from the merchant. Now, what we do is the logistics cost needs to be borne by someone. So it is passed on to the network as a cost. And the buyer app would choose to pass that on to the consumer or might choose to absorb some of it depending on what they'd like to do. So as I said, we are operating right now on an ad cost basis, largely such that whatever value is available, that's available to growing the network. The incentives are not just coming from one place, and they might be many of the transactions actually on a daily basis on ONDC are actually in the money. It's not that all the transactions are supported by incentives, but just like you've seen large platforms get built, there'd be incentive for new customers. There'd be incentives for dormant customers. There'd be incentives for increasing average order value. What is happening is that the consumer behavior is getting established. And as the scale is coming in, as the behavior is coming in, the whole supply chain here is going to create value and it'll reduce the cost of doing business for the merchant. So the cost for the merchant is not going to go up. In fact, if anything, the cost is going to come down.
So Mugdha, all of this is great, but surely the players at the other end are not sitting idle, right? How are Swiggy and Zomato reacting to these discounts from ONDC?
That's a very interesting question because, it's pretty clear that Swiggy and Zomato are not going to take this lying down. They've maintained a duopoly in the food delivery market for a long time.
Right.
And remember, a lot of different players tried to enter the market. Amazon launched its food delivery business. They shut that down. Ola had also launched its food delivery business. They really couldn't scale up. Uber also tried and then finally sold Uber Eats to Zomato. So multiple players have tried to really challenge Swiggy and Zomato. Now with ONDC really taking off and becoming this buzzword, we understand from some of the restaurant operators themselves that their account managers from Swiggy and Zomato have inquired with them about why the listing prices are lower on ONDC.
So ONDC is definitely not a non-starter. From food delivery, it is now fast expanding into other segments. Reports have said that 55,000 cab drivers have joined the network and consumers have taken up to 35,000 rides a day. The government recently said that India's postal service, that has a network of 160,000 post offices, will join the ONDC network to provide logistics support to small traders in the country. ONDC aims to raise e-commerce penetration in India to 25% from 8%. So I asked Mugdha if she thinks ONDC will really change India's e-commerce landscape.
Multiple different players will look at this question differently, because if you ask restaurants today if ONDC is needed, they're going to say yes, because they definitely need an alternative to Swiggy and Zomato. And the same with even online merchants, whether they want ONDC, and they will say yes, because Amazon, Flipkart have also created this duopoly. And that is also what the government seeks. They don't want these big tech companies to really create, duopolies or monopolies in all these crucial sectors, and they want
Indeed.
more competition. And ONDC definitely will bring in that competition. So it is definitely going to change the e-commerce landscape. This is a first of its kind initiative where the entire e-commerce value chain and the supply chain is going to be unbundled. And they're going to be different players going to do different parts of e-commerce. So we have to see whether that really works and whether that really scales. But definitely ONDC is here to stay.
And that's the thought we'd like to leave you with today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief with Mugdha Warrior and me, Anirban Chaudhary. This episode was produced by Surohini Jain and Sumit Pandey, sound design Indranil Bhattacharjee, executive producers Anupriya Nair, Arijit Barman and myself. Do like, share and subscribe so that you don't miss any episode of The Morning Brief that drops Tuesdays, Thursdays and Fridays on a listening platform of your choice. Keep listening and have a good weekend. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are mentioned in the description.